Ross Ulbricht is serving a double life sentence without parole for all nonviolent charges for creating a website. Please help free this peaceful man. Go to freeross.org and sign and share the petition.
Stores. So it's little wonder that smart shoppers everywhere take time out to pause and refresh. And where else but in the fountain where they serve ice-cold Coca-Cola?
The eMilitia Podcast, Episode 31, UK Gun Control, and Why It Should Matter to Americans. Enjoy.
Hello and welcome to the eMilitia Podcast. Tonight I'm joined by Anglo-Libertarian and myself, BR or Bloody Revolutions, and we will be discussing the topic of British gun control. So this is going to be a bit different from our standard fare. It's just the two of us, and we're coming to you with a more educational, less conversational topic. We're going to be really delving into the history of this, and for the sake of our audience, it's going to be family friendly, heavily inspired by Pat from Uncensored Tactical's episode on gun control from his series Importance of Gun Ownership, and the episode in particular that inspired me to do this one was Never Owned a Gun, episode 125 with Matt from the Status Quo guesting. It was a brilliant episode on sort of the myths of gun ownership and like how important it is to culture and such. And we're going to be looking at a different side of that, sort of gun control as a tactic by the state, how it works, and kind of a case study on how it has taken place in the UK, and how it's not a uniquely British problem, how it's been allowed to take place, but rather how it's a universal tactic that we see in every country. So in that vein, this is not just focused on just our regular audience. We really want to expand who we're reaching with this one because it is purely educational. So a little bit on why we're the ones to tell you about this. So background on us. So we're both British libertarians. I myself have quite the history with gun ownership. I've been shooting my whole life. I've briefly worked in the British gun industry. For those who don't know, I worked at a gun shop, at a premier British shooting shop. They had like precision rifles. They did manufactured suppressors. I'm not going to drop any names because my boss will hunt me down. And then I also trained at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. And so I've been around rifles, shooting, guns my whole life. It's just part of my life. But that's not so common for the average Brit.
Yes. I'm just here for moral support.
Anglo's very Anglo-Libertarian, very well versed in history, philosophy, etc. We're two British libertarians. Yeah, I gotta speak you up. Two gun rights absolutists from Britain. We do exist. Sadly, there's not more, but there are those of us who don't believe in the Second Amendment, but the natural right to own firearms. Mm-hmm. So we'll get into that. So I think a good thing to start off, now that we have our admin out of the way, is the history of British gun control, gun culture, warrior culture, if we're heading back far enough. And so a lot of Americans see Britain as a very sterile, very controlled, kind of spineless society, because it's been a long time, or so you'd think, since we could carry a gun on our hip, since we owned our right to self-defense. it's not quite so far back as you'd think, which is the disturbing thing of how quick these things can take control of a society. And trying to think of a clean word for this.
What are you trying to describe?
Vacation.
Watering down of principles like the right of self-defense.
Yes. Okay.
How's that?
My editing is going to be very interesting. So, all right. So, if we get back into the history of how we got from, how we've gone from being a borderline completely disarmed society for all intents and purposes, from the Anglo-Saxon culture where we had warring factions vying for land and resources and such. The principal turning point, I guess, goes back to William of Orange and the very first kind of disarmament of a British people. So I don't know if you want to take this one, Anglo.
Okay, so a piece of British history that we're really not going to get into detail here is all around a period in British history where Protestants and Catholics just loved to go out and kill each other every now and again. And during one of these events where a new king had a claim to the throne and came over and changed a bunch of stuff, William of Orange came over from the Netherlands, became the King of England, and introduced a document called the Bill of Rights 1689. A very, very special and relevant document, because within this Bill of Rights, to paraphrase, because it's written in Old English and is very weird and hard to understand, it outlined the civil right to bear and keep arms, and I think it also mentions armor. And this was in response to how in the past, because of these secular wars between Catholics and Protestants, one side was always more disadvantaged than the other, and it aims to level the playing field and say, if you are alive, you're allowed to defend your life. That is basically as far as it goes. And you can see a lot of parallels here to the American Constitution and the US Bill of Rights, which says that the citizen has a right to keep and bear arms. It's a very, very similar wording to this Bill of Rights, and is where the American one gets it from. Which begs the question, if we have a Bill of Rights going back hundreds of years that says a similar thing to the American Constitution, why do they have guns and we don't? And that's a very, very long, winding road that we're going to go ahead and explore.
Gonna give a very trimmed down version based on a timeline written by P.A. Lutey, a particular gun rights absolutist from Britain, probably our most notable in recent history, if perhaps all of our history. So if we want to start getting into that,
Libertarian Party.
Yes. So P.A. Lutey, he was an advocate for not just the right to bear arms, but also free speech. So he believed the citizenry had a right to the knowledge of arms, like arms making. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go out and build one, but you should be able to view, a guide on how to make a machine gun. Things like the Anarchist Cookbook, you should be able to have a guide on explosives. These things should not be legislated. You should have a right to any so-called dangerous information you desire.
Yeah, and one point that he really, really nailed on the head, which we can explore at the end of this episode when we go into another topic, is that there is no such thing as placing a ban on firearms. A firearm is a piece of technology. It means it's something that humans can make and use. You cannot ban firearms, because to do so, you would have to ban the ability for the capability for a human to know how to make it and then operate it. And he went very far out of his way to prove this point.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So there is no such thing as gun control, because you can't control what people know.
Unfortunately, the British government doesn't quite get this, and they have done their damnedest to prove that you can control what people know, which is a gross misappropriation of basic human rights. But that's a topic for another day. So Pierre Loti himself, he wrote a very detailed description of sort of the timeline of how we went from being the descendants of a warrior culture to just this disarmed populace that's terrified of knowing that their neighbors may own weapons, despite it being regulated to almost non-existence.
Yeah, and he puts it very well in this timeline he's written for us to peruse, where he tells us in 1900, well, I'll go word for word. In 1900, the British government trusted the people with firearms and to be their own guardians. Prime Minister Robert Gascoigne Cecil, what a very aristocratic name.
I'm
The
so glad
Marquess
you
of
pronounced that one, because
Also, he's got a title as well. The Marquess of Salisbury said he would lord the day when there was a rifle in every cottage in England. How weird is that of a sentence to hear?
so for
Very surreal.
our lacking on vocab friends, Lord is it sounds negative, but he hoped for the day there was a
Yes,
rifle in every cottage in England.
absolutely.
And this was a prime minister, so our president, the leader of the country.
3 years after that statement, a very direct statement was made, as Luty tells us, the first ever gun control law, which was a minor one, requiring a permit to carry a handgun and restricting the age of purchasers. It was the first toe over a slippery slope towards complete firearms prohibition. And he's absolutely right. 100 years later, the right to bear arms would be, for all intents and purposes, non-existent.
Oh yeah, I mean, some Brits would consider even talking about the right to bear arms borderline terrorism.
Yeah,
Whereas in the early 1900s and the late 1800s, bicycle magazines would have ads for concealed carry pistols that you could have on your person for comfort during bike rides.
yeah. I
Have
think,
you ever seen
well, God,
those?
you showed me one, and I thought it was especially funny how in the advert it said like "Never fear a tramp again."
Yep.
So you
Yeah.
got these British old gentleman chaps in their top hats riding around on bicycles shooting homeless people. That's quite a picture.
I'm quite safe now that I have my Derringer.
Be gone, peasant! Back, back, back.
Hey, I'm sure it happened. But yeah. So around that time period, it was perfectly acceptable in a not a gun magazine, a bicycle magazine, to advertise a pistol for personal defense. And before then, this was, I mean, as long as firearms have been around, this was a perfectly acceptable thing, because of course it is. Of course, you should have a right to defend yourself. That's just,
Yeah.
you know,
How is that? Could you argue with that?
if an animal doesn't have claws or teeth, it's usually prey, and people luckily adopted the same kind of mannerisms. It's just common sense. But as we well know, uh, government doesn't quite follow common sense, and we will we will be seeing much of that.
Hmm.
Um,
So we start to get into how Lucy doesn't give us a reason in why 1903, the first ever gun control law, a minor one, well, he calls it a minor one, was passed. But in 1919, this was a very, very turbulent time in the history of the Western world. I'd like to, the government started to use the precedent of communist insurgents and anarchists from all over the world just causing havoc. And we know this to be true because there was the Haymarket Affair, which was a anarchist communist attack in, I think it was New York, it was somewhere in America, where an anarchist set off a time bomb in a gathering of people. I think it might have even been like a union strike, and killed a bunch of innocent people. So the Red Scare was around before the Cold War, and this was the precedent that the big gun control act, the 1920 Firearms Act, was enacted in this country. And
yes, and government will never let a good tragedy go to waste.
of course not.
If there's something happening in another part of the world and it makes, world news, I mean, people are going to be fearful. What are you going to do about it? Something must be done. There must be a law. And so the government rubs its hands together and goes, "You're quite right. Would you like a law?" And they slap one
Don't worry,
down.
we'll give you one.
It doesn't matter how relevant it is, as we will see in a suit. An example we'll tell you about soon. But really, any excuse to clamp down a little bit more control they will take it.
Hmm. And so the way that they go on to infringe your rights here is a already egregious crime, where British subjects, there is keen to note, could now only buy a firearm if they could show a good reason for having one. Apparently, so here's what the government says: there's anarchists and communists running around everywhere, killing everyone. Why do you need a firearm?
Yeah, like maybe because there's communists and anarchists running around killing everyone.
It's incredible.
Oh, and an important thing to note for non-Brits and perhaps even for you, Anglo. So British firearm law differentiates a firearm from a shotgun, which is interesting. And we'll get into it. So we'll get into it in a little bit. But a firearm would be like your your rifles, pistols, and then shotguns are a separate thing. So this is only legislating rifles and pistols, whereas shotguns are still viewed as like a completely different implement to later be legislated in its own way. Just to
it's just so different in the way that he uses a fire control group and a primer and then projectile to shoot out of a barrel. I mean, poof.
Well, I mean, we never said government knew what they were talking about.
That's a very bad assumption to ever make. Okay, so
a good reason.
I was just going to say this next bit on 1936 is a big one.
Oh, well, we still got a bit on 19. So
okay.
So you could now only buy a firearm if you could show a good reason. And so a firearm certificate system, the same one that's still in use today, and that I unfortunately partook in as a British firearm owner. So that's still around from 1919. So I always forget the quote in its entirety, but a right given up temporarily is a right gone forever. It's a liberty that will never be returned. I mean, 1919, they had a fear of communist insurgents and domestic and foreign anarchists. And still today, they're like, well, terrorists. So we still need this. So, the firearms certificate came about, implemented and abused by police. Pierre Luty is keen to note. The 1920 Gun Control Act was the beginning of the end for private firearms, he goes on. Firearm ownership in England. So much for Robert Gascoigne Cecil's remarks of a rifle in every cottage in England being a laudable goal. And so,
you pronounced it mostly right.
Yeah, well, I'm common as muck. I don't have your radio voice for these pronunciations. I'm gonna have to every time there's like
common.
Every time there's a pronunciation, you're educated. Every time there's a pronunciation.
Hang on. You just said pronunciation. Now that is a travesty.
Leave me alone. I'm common.
Let's get on with the show.
Yes. Every time there's a pronunciation, I'm just gonna go silent until you say it.
You did it again. Pack it in.
Anyway. So yeah, we jump from I mean, people. When I say Wild West, people think Indians and bandits, but we jump from pre-1900 having guns are just a tool that you would own, the same as a hammer, to we now have to have a permit to carry a handgun for defense, and restricting the age of who can have one. So
this is within 20 years, and for no actual reason.
Yes,
It's incredible.
So, the first 20 years of gun control, you now have to have a permit to defend yourself. You have to be a certain age to defend yourself, and then they go on and say you have to have a good reason for having a firearm, and we have to know where it is. Like firearm certificates. It's effectively, if for our American friends, think of the certificate system as a method of registration, because it is registration.
It's exactly that.
Yeah, it's absolutely totalitarian in how they document you. I'll get into the specifics of the firearms license later, but so a good reason they'll say, oh, you already have a 308. Do you really need a 30-06? They're kind of similar. You already have one. you don't need another caliber that's similar to that. You've already got a 30 cal. Or they'll say you've already got 122. You don't need another one. And so they dictate what you are allowed to own. It's not like you get a firearm certificate and then you're a firearm owner. It's completely up to your firearms officer, which again I'll get into in a bit what that quite means. But they decide what you can have. Every little piece of property they permit you to buy is up to them, their discretion.
Lovely.
And that's by 1920.
Yeah.
We still got another 100 years of tyranny to come.
Mm-hmm. Right, so on to 1936 then. So in 1936, short-barreled shotguns were outlawed, and the question is why? There is no evidence I have seen of this sort of method of firearm being used in any sort of crime, which again isn't even a good reason enough in itself. But the government's reason was that civilians had no legitimate reason for owning them, despite the fact that short-barreled shotguns are incredibly useful if you don't live in the city. I guess that's something that the politicians frequently fail to realize. It's not just, it's not even defending your life at that point. It's using it on your property. For the reason that he gives was using it for ratting, which, like, if you live in the countryside, that's just something you have to do. And now the government says you've got no legitimate reason, as if they have any sort of capacity to tell you what you do or don't have reasons for to do with your own property. But there we are.
Well, the government knows how you should live your life to the fullest. They are
Of course.
the experts on that. All hail government. So interestingly, the same year they banned fully automatic firearms. They were outlawed in 1936, and so it's really crazy. Was that after? I'm not gonna get into U.S. gun control. Anyway,
Oh, the NFA.
Yeah.
I think it's around the same time. I think you're right.
Yeah. So it's interesting. What's crazy to me is they were allowed up until that point. You'd think full auto firearms would be the first thing they'd hit because they're so crazily dangerous. But I think it's kind of telling it's not the first thing that government went for. They were scared of terrorists in 1919, and yet it would be like almost another 20 years before they got to full auto firearms. Like a completely different government by that point.
Yeah, and they were going after shotguns and things first, which, like, if you're a terrorist, that's not your first weapon of choice. Clearly, that's not the people they were going out to criminalize. It's clearly for control over the populace.
Yeah, and that's the real silent game being played in the background of all this. It's for every demonstrated purpose, there's something kind of quite sinister going on in the background, and they get less and less veiled as the populace is less and less armed. Like eventually, it's just borderline, like, up yours. You can't have this. There's less and less legitimacy given because they don't feel the need to calm down the populace because they're unarmed. Why do I care what they think?
Exactly.
They don't have guns.
What are you going to do about it? I say you can't have it, and I say so that's it. You literally can't do anything about it. So how far does that go?
So Lucy goes on. Another slide down the slippery slope. The reasoning has now changed from the government needing to show reasons for the restrictions to the people to needing to show reasons to exercise their rights to a government telling them that there was no acceptable reason. So again, nanny state being nanny state, telling you how to live your life, as we were saying. The English Bill of Rights states that the subjects which are Protestants may have arms for their defense.
It just goes back to the Bill of Rights we talked about earlier.
Yeah. So Protestants may have arms for their defense, suitable to their condition and as allowed by law. So that's kind of an interesting one. Suitable to their condition and as allowed by law. So effectively, it's not a right.
Yeah.
Your Bill of Rights say as the law allows you to have them. So it's not quite a right anymore, which it's such a fundamental flaw in the way the English Bill of Rights was set up. It's like we can tack on a sticky note at any moment, and your right becomes a privilege, which it always was because of the way this was stated. I think it's why the American founders, focus so much more on natural rights rather than legal rights.
But they can still fall into this trap with how the Second Amendment says that the right of the militia to keep and bear arms. Everyone then says, well, that means the army. And it's no matter how, you can try and make it really, really clear, and people will still claw and grab as many straws as they can to disarm the people.
I'm literally grasping at straws. So, where does that bring us to? Okay.
Oh,
so
there's a bit about too, isn't there?
Yeah. So they go on about these various statutes are a public allowance rather than a natural right of resistance and self-preservation. So when the sanctions of society and laws are found insufficient to restrain the violence of oppression, they're kind of going on. They really tiptoe around what is and isn't your right to own arms, and like it's again just subject to the whim of a changing government. Like whoever's in charge dictates what your rights are. It's just all liquid as hell. Nothing is permanent. They're not rights at all, despite the the title of the bill that was written in, the English Bill of Rights.
Yeah, a very recurring theme throughout British political history. And I want to also add how this whole debacle we're talking about right now just took place in 1936. Prime Minister at the time, a man named Stanley Baldwin, Prime Minister for the Conservative Party. What is it Conservatives like to tell us? They're the ones who believe in classical liberalism and the right to be free. So, and the same rhetoric they said then is the same rhetoric the Republican Party says now, and then goes against everything they say and just proceed to strip you of your rights regardless, because they're allowed to. When they say we're the party of freedom, anything they do gets a pass and is excused by the voters. And this is how you get down the slippery slope.
Oh yeah, absolutely. To the point that right-wing god President Reagan, he was one of the best gun grabbers in recent history, and no one remembers him for it apart from gun rights absolutists. He gets a free pass. It's always blamed on the left, but really something to absolutely nail home. If you learn nothing else from this episode, it is the individual versus government in terms of hanging on to your rights. It's not the left versus right. The right has done nothing for your right to bear arms. They have taken their foot off the accelerator by like 2 miles per hour. They really, and sometimes they stamp down on it. They're outright the ones who pass legislation effectively, because if they're the ones behind it, there's no one else to fight back.
Exactly.
They make the best gun grabbers.
No doubt.
So here's where history gets very fun, because we're getting into World War II when a land invasion of Britain was seeming possible, and for non-Britons out in the countryside of Britain, it's very common to come across pillboxes, defenses designed to resist a German invasion, and there was also weapon caches put around like farms, buried in various locations, machine guns, explosives, intended for, if the defense of mainland Britain failed, for there to be a British insurgency against an occupying German force. And so all of a sudden, the government's like, oh my god, the British people don't have guns. As a consequence, a direct consequence of the 1920 Gun Control Act, because they reduced it to a permit, a license. You have to go through bureaucracy and jump through hoops. Your hammer you can go down to the hardware store and buy suddenly becomes this elusive item you have to bargain with the government to have access to. Of course, the hammer is not a hammer, it's a gun, but just another tool. So anyway,
Hang on. So what you're telling me here is that guns were banned to protect us, but now we can't protect ourselves because we have no
yeah,
guns.
that's
Who
insane,
saw
isn't
that
it?
coming?
So while the mainland United States had a rifle behind every blade of grass, Britain
Great quote.
had a rifle behind lots of red tape.
And
And
inflation.
yeah, we weren't ready for a mainland invasion, and we were much more at risk of it. We had the channel between us and the biggest war of the century, and and we're just sitting there twiddling our thumbs, hoping that Dad's army, and I'm not going to get into the history of that, but a ragtag like National Guard, but like armed with only items you could find at yard sales.
Yeah. Don't panic, Mr. Mannering.
Yeah, it was a disaster of a defense force. It was made up of people who weren't ready to go and fight on the mainland, so the elderly and the exceptionally young, armed with pointy sticks with knives taped to the end, and the very rare privately owned rifle, and then a few handed out by government from various. Yeah, I think
Oh yeah,
early
and
on,
it's
early
essentially
on.
no firearms training because they had no ammunition to do it with either.
Yeah, because it was all going to the front, and so it came to the point Britain had to ask American citizens to send them every type of rifle and handgun at the outbreak of World War II. So the British people would have a mean of defending their home against an invading Nazi force, and the Americans quite kindly responded by sending every type of firearm they had to the unarmed and helpless people of Britain.
Can they do it again?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes. Please engage in that
If
again.
you feel like doing that, I'm all for it.
Be very appreciative. But no surprise, typical British government. By the end of the war, the British people did not get to keep the guns. The government seized most of them back, dumped them in the sea, which was not very thankful of them to the Americans. It's just like, oh, thanks for the guns, the lease. We don't
Now
need them
go,
anymore.
now go screw yourself.
And Pierre Lucy remarks, such was the British government's gratitude to the American public and distrust of their own people. So they armed them in a time of emergency and decided they were to be trusted then, but then immediately it was a danger to public safety afterwards.
Yeah.
So
Hitler's dead, and now you're a criminal.
yeah, now you're the next big danger to us.
Yeah.
It's such an insane shift of of like what's okay for the citizenry to have. There is just no groundwork like this is how the law works or how we perceive the British public. It's just like it's liquid. That's the only way to say it. It's just so liquid.
You know, the logic here as well. At the time, we didn't know that World War II was going to be the last major conflict for the next so long. Like, it was only 20 years before that we were in the Great War, and then we had an even bigger war. And so, I mean, you don't need to put two and two together to say the government should have thought there's a possibility this could happen again. So why are we going to dump this all in the sea and then go crying to the Americans again when we need them? Fortunately, this didn't happen. But I mean, how would you know back then? You'd have no idea.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, there was the threat of the USSR immediately after the war. Like the second Hitler was toppled, they were looking at the Russians like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen there.
Yeah. God, it's insane. It does. A 5-year-old could make more sense of this.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I say, it's common sense. It's just a complete act of ignoring common sense. There's not a hint of common sense in British gun law or weapon law.
Any gun law. It's happening not around the world. Definitely not exclusive to us.
So we get to 1946, just after the war ends. Self-defense was no longer considered a good reason for acquiring a police-issued firearm certificate. The slippery slope got even steeper, Pierre Luty remarks. And quite right, because now, going from a nation being armed as an emergency precaution to invasion, literally...
to defend themselves.
Yeah, self-defense of their land, their person, their property, their nation,
families,
to if you're out on the street and someone's trying to mug you at knife point, self-defense isn't appropriate anymore. This isn't just limited to carry out on the street. This goes to the
It's
extent
owning a
of
firearm.
for self-defense. If you grab to this day, if you grab your shotgun middle of the night, which should be in a locked safe attached to an interior wall, bolted to the wall, if you grab a shotgun and kill a home intruder in the middle of the night, you will go to prison for premeditated murder.
And this happened. Tony Martin, look him up.
Yep.
1999.
And the worst thing is, we remarked in an early episode joking about self-defense lamps, but if you grab a baseball bat in the middle of the night, and this will be a shocker to our American friends, but baseball is not the pastime in England. If you grab a baseball bat in the middle of the night and use it to defend yourself, the cop's first question will likely be, why do you have a baseball bat next to your bed? Do you play baseball? And you're going to get nailed to the wall for having something, because it's a premeditated weapon. If you don't use it for sporting, why do you have it?
Yeah.
It's gonna be,
And the government will tell you that no, if you kill someone in self-defense, it's normally justified. But if you have a knife in your bedside table and use it against an intruder, you're a murderer. If you are somehow lucky enough to make it to the kitchen and grab a knife out of your cutlery drawer and use it, apparently that's okay. The end result is you've stabbed a home intruder. What difference does it make?
Yeah, how prepared they punish you for being prepared.
Yeah, they want you to be killed in your own home than kill someone for entering your home.
It's just it's insane. It's there's no other word for it. There's
really
no common sense to it. It's just this nanny state, like just rely on the cops. And in Uncensored Tacticals episode, they go into detail about why even when the cops arrive on scene, there's no guarantee they're going to save you. But I'll leave that to their episode to go into detail and absolutely tear that argument of just call the police to ribbons. Especially in England, where you commonly do not have armed officers responding to situations. So you might get a couple cops arrive, know that there's someone with a knife inside, and then have to call armed backup, which then delays delays your supposed rescue even further, especially if you're rural, which a lot of England is rural.
Well, I'd like to ask you then, in 1953, when this was all, when it all came to a head, could you tell me who was the Prime Minister of this country?
Ooh. What?
I'll give you a very big hint.
Was he a war hero? Yeah.
Yeah. Winston Churchill, the man himself.
Well,
National
he was
hero and figure of British freedom and defiance and resistance. We shall fight them on the beaches. No, you're not even allowed to fight them in your own home.
Yeah, I mean, so carrying any type of weapon for self-defense was made illegal in 1953. This doesn't mean carrying a knife and a pistol was made illegal. This means carrying a taser, carrying a baton, like anything intended for self-defense. If you carry a plastic knuckle duster, if it's intended for self-defense, any type of weapon for self-defense, you're breaking the law to this day.
I mean, what the hell's a weapon? I could put keys in between my knuckles and punch someone. Is that a weapon? Am I not allowed to have house keys?
I think so. I think if you had keys that were like kind of designed, they were clearly designed to be used defensively. Like there might be, I'm sure it's out there somewhere where they've got like key-looking self-defense weapons. They would be illegal. If it's clearly intended for self-defense, you would get hit with a charge.
I am sure if I just put my regular house keys between my knuckles and punch someone, then they would find a way to say I was using a weapon with deadly intent. I guarantee it.
It would be on the table depending on like.
Oh, they try it. They try it. There's no doubt in that.
Yeah, but I mean, we don't even have to go that far to not be able to carry a non-lethal, and you have every right to carry a lethal weapon on you in our opinion. But it even in a culture that supposedly lacks like a firearm culture, etc., a warrior culture, any sort of we're viewed as spineless. So it should be, oh, a non-lethal weapon. Great, carry those. That's lovely. That's very flowery and, peaceful of you. Nope, can't even do that. It's just like, just call the police, you bigot. Like, you horrible, violent person, you villain. Just get raped and call the police. Just get mugged, call the police. If you carry a knife, you're a gangster. If you carry a taser, you're just waiting to hurt someone. That's their opinion.
But and you know what, BR? We need to stress this for people in America listening. He's not joking. this is
No,
he's 100% serious.
it's I mean, our legal system is a joke, but this is not a joke.
Yeah.
You can't even like we were saying earlier, you couldn't even have a taser for home defense. It's not just carrying it on you in public. It's owning it.
Mm-hmm.
Self-defense is not allowed unless it's like in a bid for desperation, you grab a lamp and hit an intruder over the head, or whatever's to the left or right of you. That's like the only acceptable thing. If there's any sort of premeditated, like, oh well, he had a cricket bat and he's not in any clubs, he doesn't play even recreationally. His mum said so. You're done.
Yeah.
So it's a real rapid descent from here. It's a full-on vertical drop. In the next few years we're gonna hit. So in 1967, a chap, and again P.A. Luti's elegant wording, a chap by the name of Harry Roberts blasted 3 policemen to death in a London street using a 9mm Luger pistol, and the British government restricted shotguns for the very first time.
Round of applause. Pat yourself on the back.
Let's let that one hang in the air for a second. A man used a 9mm pistol to kill people, and then the government decided, what a grand tragedy. Let's limit shotguns. What?
What's our government got against shotguns? They did the same with the anarchists back in 1920. They just hate shotguns.
Well, so that was short-barreled shotguns being banned. So this is the first time we see shotguns licensed. So this is why I differentiated earlier. A firearm is a rifle or pistol, and a shotgun is a separate device. So shotguns now are also licensed. So you have a firearms license if you want to own a rifle or a pistol up until this point, and then you have a shotgun license. 2 separate things. You have to pay money to the state to buy your rights back. Well, a little bit of your right, a crumb of your right. So yeah, shotguns, they're like, sweet, tragedy, outrage, 67, cops killed, 3 good roses in blue. Yep, let's ban something else. And so shotguns, license.
Again, there's a crime happens in London. Let's punish the rural population for this.
Yeah.
All the time.
So it's just another case of the government being opportunistic. This isn't some caring entity that's like, oh well, let's do a study on pistol. Let's see how dangerous these are out in the hands of the public. Let's see, is this a common murder weapon? It's like, no, guns are bad. Ban shotguns. This is a good time to make a move on shotguns.
Let's just put a list of the different kinds of guns there are on a dartboard. Throw a dart, whichever one hits, it's gone.
Yeah. So now we get into another action that seems about I don't know, 63 years too late. So in 1919 they were scared of anarchists and communists after the bombing in New York. And so 1982 they started jumping on black powder muzzle loaders. Because obviously you have to have access to black powder. You'd think if they were so scared of a bomb threat, maybe instead of a firearms license back in 1919, they would have looked into powder, because it was an explosive threat. But no, they're just getting around to them. They'll get around to all of them, don't you worry. But in 82,
the commies did like to use guns as well. There is. They
did. But in this particular, it's just like the shotgun and pistol thing. Like there's a handgun attack, and so they ban shotguns. They saw an explosive attack in a different country, 3,000 miles away, and they jump on firearms. It's just, again, that opportunistic, let's go for X because we have an opportunity because of Y. They don't line up. They don't make any sense. It's just tragedy, action. It's not AB, it's A, and then like 42. They don't line up. It's nuts.
Uh-huh.
This is where they get crazy intrusive. And like I said, the more disarmed the populace gets, the more brazen they get with the actions they just write into law. There's so black powder muzzleloader shooters and hand loaders were required to allow police
Which year is
inspection.
this?
Sorry?
Say which year it was as well.
Oh, so 1982, black powder muzzleloader shooters and hand loaders were required to allow police inspection of their security arrangements to ensure safe storage, quotation marks, of the powder they possessed, meaning that agents of the state could demand entry into an Englishman's home at any time of day or night without a warrant.
Because the government knows all about safe storage. It's not like they lose really important things all the time.
Yeah, civil asset forfeiture is not a thing. And so a few years before you lost the big push with the NFA under good old Ronnie Reagan, we had something that was even worse than red flag laws enacted in 1982. Again, this kind of time period, for context, there's a lot of upheaval politically. You got the punks out in the streets scaring the hell out of good old Thatcher. So really, any opportunity to reduce sovereignty of the individual means more security for the state in the eyes of our neocon rulers. So they can demand entry into any muzzleloader, hand loader's home any time of day because they're a security risk. So it's just your door, your private domicile is now just an open door to the state. You have lost your right to privacy. Just like that.
Yep.
And it's crazy intrusive because it's not just going to be a knock on the door and a chat over tea. It's going to be them demanding to search your house. They want to see where it's stored and then probably search your other storage areas.
Yep, and you can't say no. They're going in your house no matter what you say about it.
Yeah.
And again, no reason for this. It just happened out of nowhere because they can just do whatever they want now.
Yeah, it becomes less opportunistic and more just, this is what we're going to do now. Again, like I said, vertical descent into hardcore gun control. Not a little slope, not a little, action, reaction, just full speed.
Because there's nothing you can do about it. If you don't like it, tough shit. You've got no way to stop it now.
Yeah. And so we reach 1988, and this is where kind of where it ends. I mean, not where gun control ended, but for the ability to have any form of resistance against hostile entities, all semi-automatic rifles were banned, including pump-action rifles. The personal property, so this is 1988, the personal property of law-abiding people was once again outlawed and seized. All the guns were registered and easy to find. That is to say, all the legally held ones, eMilitia wants to note. So, the gun registration system at this point had been active for about 60, 70 years. So, actually, yeah, 60 years. So, you're a few generations into gun owners. Just this is what they do now. There's the rebellious energy of gun owners who might have been disgruntled. Like they've grown up. This is just what gun ownership is. There's no network like we have today, where we could all hop on Instagram and be like, tyrants. What are we going to do about it? You just all you have your clubs and you all sort of mill about, all 6 of you, because shooting's not. It's a very small culture in England, and so
there is a YouTube channel called English Shooting. So if you want to see what it's like, go ahead.
See every single British gun owner.
There's like 5 per video.
But yeah, so semi-automatic rifles. I mean, in the US, we're already castrated as to what arms you might own, from the the private ownership of battleships in the post-revolutionary era to the semi-automatic variants, bastardized versions of military rifles we have now. you are not equal to the state, and if you're not equal to the state, you're a subject. And
Mhm.
so this is the last nail in the coffin for Brits being anywhere near able to resist their government, and they're already like just buggered.
And so this was 1988. Previous thing we mentioned was 1982. So I'd like to ask you again, who was the prime minister throughout all of the 1980s?
Let me guess, were they right wing?
Oh, very apparently.
Oh God! Just as a side note, do you remember when Thatcher died and they were like all of the hoity-toity conservatives like crying on TV?
And no, I don't remember that, to be honest. I
Oh,
wasn't
okay.
paying attention to politics at that time.
Oh, okay. So there was images. They were I don't know how they were trying to swing it, but Thatcher, very for our American listeners, as controversial as Reagan was in the US, like right wing god and just despised by the left. And so it was the same thing here when Thatcher died. It was a mix of, oh yeah, I'm gonna go and you know what on her grave, and also upper class conservatives weeping like like North Koreans under a dictator. It was nuts. Cry for the cameras or be shot.
Yeah.
So yeah, at this point, semi-automatic rifles. Although something to note, the only semi-automatic rifle you can have is a 22 in England to this day. So I mean that takes away your right to even have somewhat of an ability to resist government. You still can with bolt actions and stuff, but you are so outgunned at this point. You've been reduced to, kind of peasant level resistance. It's you are not an individual. You're a subject.
So we have good old Maggie Thatcher to thank for this. The Iron Maiden, the after
More like Iron
Church,
Curtain.
yeah, after Churchill, the second most defiant symbol of standing up for the British and their freedoms and all that is good about this country and how fantastic the Britain is and how they are such a free soul compared to the communists that were around at the time, even though they weren't communists, they were socialists. She's Reagan's partner in crime, as she's often called. The two were like peas in a pod. And what did both of those to go and do? Levy the most outrageous laws against the individual that either country has seen, arguably.
Right wing gods.
Thanks, conservatives. Thanks for conserving our rights.
Oh God, yeah. What have you conserved? All right. So this brings us to perhaps the most infamous act of British gun control for our American friends. Most of them know about the 1996 handgun ban, and so yeah, it because no one's gonna conceal carry a rifle, and obviously people were we were distantly from being able to carry weapons for protection at this point, as we discussed. But at this point, you can't even. So let's reduce it down to how you would have a handgun in 1995. So if you wanted to have a handgun, you would have to have a firearm certificate. You would have to have a reason to own it, and a good reason to own it, according to the government. And a good reason is not I like plinking. It's I belong to a handgun shooting club. So you have to be engaged in a sport. You can't just have it because I want a gun because I enjoy going on my property and shooting cans. You have to be part of a club or something.
Wait, hang on. So you need to be in a club before you have the means to be in a club.
That one was I never did this myself. I was fortunate enough to be rural and have land to shoot on. I was never interested in I was interested, but I didn't have the time or money to get into clubs because it is expensive to join these things. So many of them have there's gateway payments to get into clubs. There's you have to pay for the firearm certificate. It's £88 pounds sterling to pay for the firearm certificate, and then I believe £67 to renew it every year.
Oof.
That's a fair bit of money to spend on a piece of paper to say I can continue to own my property.
Yeah.
But yeah, so to get back to it, yeah, you'd have to. I don't quite know how it works if you'd have to express interest in joining, and you're like, oh yeah, I've got a local club, um, and I think you might have to be in contact with them, and then they'll check up after the fact because you have a firearms officer assigned to your case, your case because you're a potential criminal, at that point. And yeah, you'll have to go through the process of having a good reason to own a pistol.
So,
But
so not only have you
1990s,
got the feds to deal with, like the feds say you need a good reason to own a pistol, you've then got to go to a FUD and say, can you convince them I've got a good reason?
yeah, and it depends on if you're their kind of people, and I not to lord on it, but who knows? They might be they could have some personal agenda against you, race, creed, etc.
Mhm.
Yeah, and again, so your firearm certificate and shotgun certificate, you have to have a note from your doctor saying you are of sound mind. So you have to go to the doctor, like have a GP and stuff, a general practitioner, and then the police may interview your doctor and likely will, and then they have to attain a note saying this person's of sound mind. They should be allowed to own guns. It.
You don't need this to become a politician. A far more dangerous proposal.
Oh yeah, you can be in charge of a an army and vote on where to send them, but owning a firearm, no, you have to have a doctor's note to say you're sane.
There's no. It's like you're trying to bunk off sick from school. It's
Well,
stupid. You're actually treated like a child.
that's the British system, the nanny state. It is like being treated like a child. That's
Mhm.
um. So to not get off into the sticks here, you can have a doctor that doesn't agree with owning guns. They might think it's all stupid because they're intellectual and they're above such things.
I know better than you.
Yes, for sure. They might, you wear too much black. Oh, well, he came in and he said he was feeling a bit depressed. He's not diagnosed with depression, but I don't know. He's got some mental health issues. Like anything. Oh, so and you have to outright lie about if you have any of those, like depression and stuff. Not that I would advocate lying about it, but if things like that can disqualify you like that. If you say you have depression, oh, maybe he's suicidal. Maybe he'll use a gun, or maybe he'll if you're manic depressive, maybe he'll go on a shooting rampage. Like they discriminate you against you, and that's again to show you Britain is the canary in the mine. You see these things enacted
Yeah.
way back when with the firearms certificate legislation, and America is just now catching up by saying, "Oh, red flag laws. Well, if someone's got mental health issues, we want to go in there and take their guns before we have to go through the court without due process and take the guns before they can commit a crime because of a health issue." Which might, like, for some people, uh, lots of people, it's therapeutic to target shoot. It's just their biggest hobby. And guess what? If you take like a firearms hobbyist's guns away and they're depressed, they're probably going to get more depressed. If that's their biggest, like, for a lot of us, it is. It's the thing we love most in life. We really enjoy marksmanship. We enjoy the practice of it. If you do that, you're just harming.
Well, and the culture of it.
Oh yeah.
It's just it's far bigger than just shooting at a target.
Yeah, but of course, the people who make these laws have no idea about this culture. It's
No, they just get armed bodyguards to escort them everywhere. They don't need to bother themselves with understanding it.
oh yeah, and just make phallic jokes about it being a compensation tactic. And it's like, no, this
Yeah.
is what I enjoy. Say what you
Come
want.
and take it.
Yeah, quite right. So again, 1996, handguns banned. They were all registered, and what can you do? You either get in a shootout and and get killed because I mean, there's no way you're gonna escape the state in good old nanny state Britain, or you roll over and you hand in your stuff. And 1996, in a culture that had been just castrated of that rebellious attitude, they gave them up. They just gave them all up. And same year, 1996, carrying any knife with a blade longer than 3 inches was made illegal.
I love how he says,
Apparently,
Yeah,
yeah,
go on.
you cannot stab someone to death with a 3-inch knife. Apparently,
It is absolutely impossible. Don't worry, the government said so.
yeah. You now had to show good reason for
Because
carrying a knife.
BR, don't worry, I've got your back. Because I know that you have a horse in this race, and trust me, 3 inches is enough to do the job.
Thank you.
Just saying.
I needed to hear that. Support your friends.
That's it, bros.
Yeah, so you now had to show good reason for carrying a knife. The presumption of innocence until proven guilty of a crime was gone. Now, if you carry a knife longer than 3 inches, you're a criminal. It's presumed you are some gangster on a way to a drug deal, and that's your weapon. It's good reason being you are a hunter, and very few other reasons. Like,
yeah, you can only get away with it if
the
you're
other
in
one,
the woods.
yeah, you're in the woods, or you're a chef going to or from work. Like, legitimately, that's a reason I have seen used and was advised to use by a firearms officer who there is no person more deserving of the term redcoat. Firearms officers are scum.
Yep.
But let's not get down that rabbit hole. So in England today, you cannot carry any type of weapon for self-defense, and you cannot use a firearm to defend your home, family, or property. The gun and weapon laws have made crime safe for criminals and other violent thugs and miscreants who infest our country today. P.A. Luti's words. And so we break the 2000s. So once we break the 2000s, we really get into how ludicrous gun laws are, to the point we start legislating toy and replica guns. So in 2006, the government passed the Violent Crime Reduction Act, and I laugh because none of this has reduced crime. We'll get into that in just actually, we'll get into it now because I'll forget. So violent crime reduction. It's a good thing they didn't use firearm crime reduction, because so that would be a very that would be to their credit if they used that, because sure, like, the less prevalent firearms are, eventually there's going to be less access, there's less firearms homicides. However, that is so besides the point when we come down to homicides, just as a general rule, because homicides did not go down. In fact, what did they do, Angler?
Well, I can tell you, as a matter of fact, gun crime overall, not specifically homicides, but gun crime over the next 4 years after handguns were banned, doubled. Thank you, government. Thanks for keeping us safe by doubling crime involving the weapons you've just banned.
So that was an interesting one. And then there just wasn't a reduction in homicides. That people still want to kill people just as much. But
who'd have thought?
But we had some feel-good laws enacted, which only went and punished law-abiding citizens, disarming them of their right to defend themselves against people, violent others. So Violent Crime Reduction Act is a very cute term. Again, we've been doing gun control since 1900. It's now 2006. We're still throwing out these useless terms like violent crime reduction. So I'll get through this one real quick. The VCRA, for same thing, shortened, restricted all realistic toy/replica guns. So now Britons were not to be trusted with even imitation non-firing replicas, your airsoft, your prop guns, etc.
Literally a piece of plastic.
Yeah, gun-shaped.
Yeah.
Violent crime reduction was once again used as a smokescreen to enact oppressive laws and deprive the law-abiding of their property. As part of the VCRA, an airgun can no longer be purchased by mail order, and the name and address of the purchaser must be registered with the seller. So, private companies did, I hate to say, well for themselves here, but they managed to stop airsoft guns and such being completely outlawed. So private companies got together and said, we will voluntarily register this stuff and keep a list for your perusal whenever you want to look at it.
Yeah.
It's so sad, but it's the only thing they could do to stop them being completely banned. So, drama groups, airsoft players, etc. All of that would have been completely wiped out. You would have been reduced to, like woodcutouts of guns.
Mhm.
And so they banded together, did a private registration method, which is like 10% less tyrannical than an outright government registration method. It's a sad state of affairs where they take it upon themselves to do this as they self-police to stop the government doing it, because they know if they can be the ones in control, they can stop it falling on the good people just like a little bit less. And when private citizens get pushed to that point that they self-flagellate, that is a real death of rebellious attitude and defiance to authority. It's just not there. Instead, they legislate themselves. Yeah, it really says it all.
Yeah, we'll punish ourselves. You don't need to bother with the punishment. We'll do it ourselves.
Yeah, like
go back to what you're doing.
no. Yeah, we understand now. Like, please don't clamp down on us. We'll clamp down on us. What? And so we're almost at the end of almost up to date. So 2009, talks with the British government were starting to devolve airgun laws to the Scottish Parliament. If and when the Scottish Parliament is given the power over airgun legislation, the Parliament has vowed to ban the sale of all airguns in Scotland. In the coming years, England will follow the Scottish example, and airgun registration and eventual licensing system will follow. The slippery slope is now in a vertical freefall. Pierluigi notes, although, my opinion, the vertical freefall was several decades prior, as I mentioned.
It was, but what he talks about here didn't actually happen.
Yeah, surprisingly, that's still in the works as of 2020. I have no idea how. I believe, I think Scotland. I don't know if has Scotland outright banned airguns yet. Do you know?
I have no idea. All I know is that I can go to the local outdoor store and still buy an airgun without a license. That's the only thing I know.
You lucky boy.
I know. I should count my blessings. Kiss the Queen on the cheek for allowing me such a freedom.
Kiss the ring. Bend the knee.
Ring?
Oh Christ. The one's on a hand, Anglo.
Oh, sorry, easily confused.
I know. And so that we've got one last piece of legislation. So as of 2019, a type of action that our American friends will not be familiar with is the Mars trigger system. So as of 2019, Britain has banned the sale and possession of lever release action and manually actuated release system, or Mars rifles. And so now these were Britain's last holdout against semi-automatic rifles. And so these are, you see companies like Franklin Armory developing various Californian workarounds to semi-automatic rifles, so you can still have ARs that, like, straight pulls and all sorts of weird systems where Mars guns are semi-automatic rifles that have been modified in a way that makes you pull the trigger twice to activate a bolt release with every firing of the rifle. The action is locked back, and the second trigger pull releases the action into battery. So this makes them not considered semi-automatics. So it's like,
of course not.
Yeah, it's just one of those technical little workarounds that the gun industry is forced to innovate and do to work to try and get a few extra years ahead of gun control.
But God, it's just objectively untrue for the government to say that's semi-automatic. That's an absolute
I know.
falsehood. Jesus.
But of course, the second the government catches up and they're like, "Oh, they have some of these." Well, I guess we'll have to jump on that. We'll rewrite it. We'll redefine everything to to put the boot firmly back on the neck
Yeah.
of
Oh, those
law-abiding
cheeky little
citizens.
buggers known as the citizenry are back at it again, finding workarounds. We better punish them.
Yeah, like these guys are. I'm sure. Well, I'll outright say it. I know for a fact, no cop has pulled up to a crime scene and ever been like, "Damn, if only these criminals didn't have manually actuated release system rifles." Like they're running amok. They're making a mockery of our laws. They are just killing and killing people because they don't need to. You know what? If you're in Britain, you can go out and find a Mac 10 on the black market. You can get AKs. You can get anything you want because that's why it's called a black market. They're
Yeah.
imported from Eastern Europe. They're left over from pre-ban. They are um, modified and restored blank firing weapons or display weapons that have had the block in the barrel drilled through and made made fireable again. There's a billion workarounds, and these are really, you don't even have to go through this much effort. We'll get into that in a minute. But yeah, guns, you will always have access to them. So this kind of legislation, it just punishes law-abiding people. It just tightens the boot on their neck, saying, "No, you're not an individual. You have no right to this. This is a privilege." And the next thing they're looking at is banning 50 cal rifles, which many Americans will be shocked to hear you can own a 50 cal rifle in England. Again, it's as heavily legislated as any other rifle, and you have to. So you have to. It's much like a pistol. Pre 1995, you have to have pre 1996. Sorry, you have to have a good reason to own a 50 cal, and there is only one good reason to own a 50 cal in England, and that is you participate in long range marksmanship competitions. So you have to have. There's only a handful of ranges that handle such competitions in England. So if you're fortunate enough to live within a few hours of it, and your firearms certificate officer isn't feeling particularly nasty that day, they may grant you, the Crown may grant you the right to purchase a 50 cal, which are prohibitively expensive, even more so in England than they are in the US because there's such a low demand for them because there's so many hoops you have to jump through. So
If they banned this, it would literally affect like 3 people.
seriously,
What the hell is the point?
So the firearm shop I used to work at, we did sell 50 cal rifles. But during the time I worked there, it was they were under threat, and they still are to this day. I haven't checked it as of this podcast, but I'm pretty sure they're still legal as of February 2020. That I'm sure that's only gonna last so much longer. But due to the recent string of terrorist attacks in England, the thing they jump on is like, well, we don't want them getting a 50 cal rifle. How are they going to get one? And I mean, I'm sure there's a few knocking around on the black market. If they want one, they will get one.
Yeah, and how are you going to make stuff on the black market more illegal?
Yeah, like please show me one. Please show me one Western terrorist attack that uses a 50 cal rifle. Like one anywhere. It's just they're just using again. They're being opportunistic and they're jumping on recent fears to try and ban something completely irrelevant, just anything. And so that brings us up to date. We are incapacitated as a nation. There's no way to resist your government if they came to your house and said, "Get in the boxcar," which, I mean, no one knows when that's going to happen. We interned Japanese citizens in the States in the 40s. Some would argue there are camp-like situations in the US right now at the border. There's not going to get into that, but there's all sorts of situations where the individual should have a right to arms to prevent mistreatment. That's just a human right. That's your right to claws and teeth.
Mm-hmm.
And the British have
technology
not had that.
And the knowledge on how to make and use stuff. You can't ban it.
Yes. Yeah. And so to expand on this person we've been referencing the entire episode, P.A. Luty, He was a firearms activist, a free speech advocate in Britain. When was he active?
90s, I think.
Yes, he was. Yes, late 80s to 90s, and even up until his death, he was still in 2011, which came 2 years after he finished writing the timeline we've been reading from. Um, he he died of cancer. But he up until his death, they had to drop the case against him. The state had to drop the case against him because he died. They badgered him about. So this man, he wrote guides on creating weapons in your garage, homemade firearms, even 9mm submachine guns. And he said, gun control does not work because you can do this anywhere. Anyone can do this in the strictest of countries. You will always be able to manufacture these. You cannot control guns or technology or the knowledge to make these things. And the British government wanted to make an example of him, and they did. They used the Terrorism Act against him. They used illegal arms construction in the 90s. They sentenced him to 4 years of prison. He served it, and he was just hounded. His whole life was dedicated in the end to fighting this particular fight, and they made his life hell for it. That's what the British government does. They are so authoritarian. They will ruin your life. It doesn't matter how peaceful you are. They will hound you until your deathbed.
Don't you dare defy them.
Absolutely not. Don't show that their policies make no difference, that they're ineffective. Do not demonstrate these things. You will be made an example of. It's that's their doctrine.
But well, I always have to stress that this it's history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme, and America is rhyming very closely to this hymn sheet that we have here. If we take Reagan's act in the 80s as similar in scale to ours in the 20s, well, you've got another 60 years until you could be in the exact same position that Britain is in now.
Yeah.
That is, within your lifetime, America could be in exactly the same state as Britain. And this is not exclusive to Britain. This is all of Europe will have a very, very, very similar story. Even Switzerland is now getting rid of its guns because of pressure from the European Union. Switzerland has been the only country alongside America in the Western world that has allowed civilians to own guns somewhat freely.
Well, I mean, the Czech Republic as well.
Constant encouragement. Oh yeah, and Poland's okay too.
So Eastern Europe rightfully has a history.
They're always off doing their own thing. So
well, because they were subject to tyranny under the USSR, they were slaughtered. Citizens they were defenseless and they suffered for it, and it's too fresh of a wound, the Cold War era, for gun control to have taken too many strides over there. It's starting to.
That wound will always close over if it's let it, because I mean, Nazis had their way with France. What have France got to? What have they got left of it?
Yeah,
nothing. They're in the same boat as Britain is.
Yep,
no different.
Yeah, I mean, if it came down to a spur of the moment invasion, it would be the same situation again. Like, oh, we're going to be airdropping guns into France, Britain, wherever it might be, because the citizens are defenseless. They're being slaughtered in the street. And it doesn't matter if it's a foreign or domestic threat. I mean, government can just as easily turn on its own. As historians often say, the first people to suffer under the Nazis were Germans. Your government can turn on you like that.
And they will.
Yeah.
Give them the chance and they'll do it.
Yeah, and again, if you want a hardcore convincing argument, we've been dragging this on a while, definitely watch episode 125 of Uncensored Tactical. I can't hammer that home enough. It's a brilliant companion to what we've ranted on about here. So there's a few bullet points that weren't particularly hit during the timeline that I just want to quickly go over. So we've hit a few of them. Actually, we've hit a lot of them. So I asked for questions from our followers, listeners, pertaining to British gun laws. are Californian laws tighter than British gun laws? And I mean, if you've been listening, I'm sure you realize, yes, they most certainly are. In California, honestly, Californian gun laws are a dream to the British shooter.
Yeah, you can own one, so there's that.
Yeah, you can own one. You can't carry it, but you can go to the shop and, with a waiting period and all the various red tape, you can still get one. Not for any good reason. You don't have to have a good reason to own a firearm in California, which is a Briton moving to California would like just breathe in that liberty. They would feel like the chains are gone. I mean, the taxes would then just murder them after. But in terms of weapon laws, I mean, self-defense within your own home, perfectly allowable. Semi-automatic rifles, perfectly allowable. Owning handguns, yep, do that. Shotguns in Britain, you can have 3 shells in a shotgun. That is the magazine limit. Interestingly, there's no limit on a rifle's magazine capacity, but seeing as they're not semi-auto, aside from 22s, it doesn't really do them much good. So the magazine limits might be a bit jarring, but shotguns, you can have unlimited magazine capacity. Well, actually, that might not be true. Might be talking out my you-know-what. They probably have a 10 round limit on, but still, I mean, compared to 3, that's quite a lot. I mean, skeet shooting is going to be a lot more fun in California than it is in Britain. So yeah, California is infinitely freer than Britain in terms of gun laws. Just to put it in perspective for our American friends. Here's another interesting one. Was there ever a British pro-gun movement? Britain has a National Rifle Association, an NRA, believe it or not. They might be even more useless than the American NRA. They have done nothing.
I mean,
ever.
that sounds unbelievable, but it's completely true.
It's basically just a forum for British gun owners to get together and go, harumph, harumph, something must be done. We shall write letters to our various representatives, and they do. And they get, some intern working under them replies back, oh, I'm very sorry to hear that. I'm sure to listen to my constituents. I went to a private school. I love shooting foxes. We will not be banning shotguns. You can write in about 50 cals or like handgun or whatever you might want to talk about. There was after the London Bridge attacks a few years ago, and the what was that British soldier who was murdered?
Lee Rigby.
Lee Rigby, yes. Thank you. So after he was murdered, there was talk about even allowing armed service members to carry for their protection, and that went nowhere. And oh, good lord, there's nothing. Nothing is listened to. So the pro-gun movement in England Britain is effectively just a grumble society. I'm deeply apologetic to those who really do fight the good fight, but it falls on deaf ears. Politics is not the friend of the gun owner. Loosening regulations doesn't do anything for them. It plays against the game. They're long-term goals. British firearms owners, the Conservatives are not on your side. The only party really favoring your gun rights is the Libertarian Party, and unfortunately, they are minuscule at the minute.
Yeah, we do have one, which surprises.
Yeah,
people.
That's news to a lot of our listeners. The British Libertarian Party. I mean, bless them. They are fighting the good fight, but again, politics, in this particular agorist's opinion, is not the way to go. And that brings us to our closing topic of discussion. So combating gun control cannot be done via politics, as I just said. It unfortunately comes down to subversive action. We are at a point where we have done everything we possibly could, to the point, Pierre Luti, adamantly, outspokenly demonstrating how ineffective gun control is, designing and building 9mm submachine guns in his garage, and they just chucked him in prison to make an example of him. So what do we do at this point? We can't write into our politicians. If we outright say I'm doing this, they arrest you. They make an example of you. So it comes down to the agorist worldview, which is living as freely as possible and circumventing state authority. Live as you please. Live peacefully, but do what you want. So 3D printing, it's a beautiful thing. It's about to hop 15 years at least ahead of gun control legislation. They're still calling them clipazines and ghost guns. That's 90s stuff at this point. Once we start, so check out pages like Control Pew and look into 3D printing for weapons. We'll get to the point. You can design a functioning firearm with nothing but plastic, some CAD files, and a cheap as hell printer. 3D printers, I believe it's
and metal. You still do need metal for the
yes, you
working
do.
parts.
Yeah,
But metal, we're not saying a barrel or a bolt. Pieces of metal you can fabricate.
yeah. So what was it called? The FGC-9. And this should make any EU gun rights absolutist giddy. The FGC-9, it's a gun designed to be printed anywhere in the EU, or really anywhere restrictive gun control is in place. As long as you have a 3D printer, the appropriate materials, and some time to print it, you can make an operating closed bolt, a 9mm gun, semi-automatic. And it functions pretty good. There's a bunch of pages on Twitter and Instagram discussing it. It's something we're going to be discussing on the show very soon. Getting into how to get into 3D printing. It's like I said, it's very cheap, around I think under $200, and I don't know how that would translate to British pricing. I haven't looked it up on British websites, but the Ender 3 printer, I believe it's called. Look into that. Crazy cheap. You can end up building a functioning 9mm gun, semi-automatic, for under $500, including the one-time purchase of the printer itself. Anywhere you can get a 3D printer, you can do that.
I want to point out, in the States specifically, you can print off a Glock 17 frame and apply all the parts to it and get yourself a Glock without having to do the background check and everything. Says
yes,
that.
you chuck the slide on on the lower, and it's good to go. I think you have to have a few metal parts.
It's mostly
for it
it's
to
all
key
Glock
into.
parts. Yeah, so it's all Glock parts except for the frame, and you need a rail to attach the slide to the frame. But that's it. You then got yourself a Glock, and the government doesn't even know about it.
Yeah, and this is very early days stuff. You have things people familiar with World War II history, you'll know about Liberator pistols being dropped into France. There's now a 3D printed version where it's like a single shot pistol, very resistant style, like a one use and then take whatever your oppressor has kind of weaponry. Yeah. But it's very important. It's not just a
working
principle
firearm
thing.
With a plastic barrel. It's insane.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like that the Liberator is so apt. It's having a weapon puts you on not quite equal but more equal footing with your oppressor, whoever they may be. Once you are armed, you have teeth and claws. I can't say that enough. You need those things, otherwise you're a subject. And so 3D printing is the future. They will not be able to legislate this worth a damn. Pierre Luti, I'm an atheist, but I hope he is up there somewhere looking down, smiling. He would be ear to ear grinning at the thought of any person on this planet, not an engineer, because he clearly had a mechanical mind. Any idiot can take a few CAD files, a printer, some plastic, some metal, and produce a functioning semi-automatic firearm. Yeah, that's freedom.
It sure is. And I said to you the other day, it is actually really, really saddening to me that he passed away at what was actually quite a young age, because I could have shook his hand. He would still be around in this country, still doing what he does, and I could have
Oh yeah,
met the man.
he
9
was
years ago, cancer took him, and that really actually makes me really sad.
it's horrible. The man was like a true diehard libertarian.
Hmm.
The Libertarian Party put out a note on his death, sort of noting his work. Yeah, but that was one man. Imagine if any idiot ANCAP or agorist nerd about the country, you can buy a 3D printer. They're not registered yet, so buy one soon. um,
Hmm.
and build yourself one of these things if you so please. I mean, it's what can they do? Subvert, create these things. Um, Most people say, well, what about ammunition? Well, there is currently a project focusing on electronic primer ammunition, all 3D printed. They want you to be able to print your ammunition. Guy on Twitter, Sword of Gideon, at Sword of Gideon, check him out. His first name's Austin, I forget the rest. But he's a literal rocket scientist producing 3D printable ammunition that will have substitute gunpowder, electronic primers, which is actually better for accuracy for my ballistic nerds. Yeah, it's really groundbreaking, like space age stuff. And when that comes about, once we have 3D printed arms, which we already have, and what will only continue to get better and better, there's 3D printed AKs already. Like,
Hmm.
they're amazing. They show them shooting. They are spot on. Really solid stuff. We're going to see that for every type of firearm in the future. These things are only going to advance and advance. We're going to look back on like the FGC9 and as archaic in 2-3 years. It's advancing so rapidly because anyone can plug into this and start innovating with a CAD file. Yeah, gun control is effectively dead. So this dreary, dystopian education of ours, it's good to end it on a positive note. And it's not a falsehood. This is the future. We have effectively won. Gun control, you cannot enforce this. It's impossible. We're gonna do a full-on episode with Control plus Pew on 3D printing, but just to whet your appetite a little bit and to alleviate the depression Brits and Americans will be suffering. It does get better. We're going to be advancing just decades at a time ahead of gun control at this rate, and there's nothing they can do about it. And it's beautiful.
What time to be alive?
Indeed. I'm going to let my co-host get some beauty sleep. Any
Much
final
needed.
notes, my friend?
No, I think that is just about covered it. I'm very happy with everything we discussed.
Your pillow is calling you.
Yeah, my brain stopped working, so there's that.
All right. Well, thank you for listening, people. I hope this has been educational. Potentially, there's going to be a follow-up on this. Of course, we're going to be discussing gun control. We are the eMilitia. This is what we do. This is our core subject. Because gun rights, they are just critical to your fundamental natural rights and protecting them. We will constantly be talking about this. And yeah, if you liked what you heard, check us out on if you're new to us, check us out on Instagram. That's the main place where you will find us. I'm at bloody.revolutions. My
I
friend
am
here.
at anglo.libertarian.
And we're also on Twitter. If you listen to the podcast, you can find us. I mean, you already listen to us, but you can listen to us on anything. YouTube, any of the good podcatchers, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iTunes, all that good stuff. Yes, share this with someone if they don't know about British gun control. And as I said earlier, definitely check out Uncensored Tacticals episode on gun ownership, episode 125. Thanks for listening, people. Hope you learned something, and see you next time.
Adios, amigos.